Today we're going to talk about 4 different ways the 4% spending rule can fail while you are in retirement. Those 4 ways are being too aggressive or too conservative with your investment strategy, a large unplanned distribution while you're in retirement, a large portfolio loss while you're in retirement, or just living too long. I've been a financial advisor for over 25 years. I've met with over 300 wealthy families throughout my career. The opinions that I'm about to share with you are based upon that empirical data set. Before we look at some illustrations and discuss how the 4% spending rule can fail during your retirement, let's quickly discuss what the 4% rule is. The 4% rule is a concept, it's an idea, and it relates to how you spend your money during retirement. There are different interpretations of what the 4% rule is, so I'm going to focus on the most common, in my opinion, which is the rigid form of the 4% rule, where we retire, we spend 4% of our initial portfolio in retirement, and then we grow that spending every single year by inflation. And what that means is the distribution of your portfolio, or the distribution off of your portfolio rather, is going to go up every single year throughout your retirement, and you just have to pick an inflation number. Most people will use 3% for inflation. Here's what happens when your portfolio is too aggressive and you try to use the 4% spending rule during retirement. In this illustration, we're making $1 million investment in the S&P 500, SPY ETF, on January 1 of the year 2000. In the first year, we're spending 4%, $40,000, and then we're growing that distribution by 3% for inflation every year thereafter. Notice what happens. After 22 years, the portfolio is out of money. The flip side of being too aggressive is being too conservative. In this illustration, we're making $1 million investment in the Vanguard Total Bond Market Index on January 1 of the year 2000. Everything else is the same. Taking 4%, $40,000 in the first year, growing it by 3% for inflation. Now, we didn't run out of money in this illustration. We still have $581,000 as of November 30, 2024. But if this person were to live another few years, I think they really start to run the risk of running out of money. So while the 4% spending rule worked for this retiree over the last 25 distribution years, if they continue to live, they may run out of money if they were in a portfolio like this where they're overly conservative. Most people will use a balanced portfolio strategy in retirement in conjunction with the 4% spending rule. So here's a look at how that performed over the last 25 years. In this illustration, we're putting $1 million in the Vanguard Balanced Index Mutual Fund. On January 1 of the year 2000, we're taking our 4%, $40,000 in the first year, growing it by 3% for inflation. After 25 years, we have $825,000, so less than we started with. All of our spending needs have been met over the last 25 distribution years, but our capital is being depleted, bringing up the risk of the 4% rule that if you live too long, there's a good chance that you can run out of money. This table shows us why the S&P 500 illustration failed. All you have to do is compare the income column to the distribution column. The income is a lot less than what's coming out of the portfolio. You're spending $40,000, but you're only earning $9,859 in income, so you have to spend over $30,000 in principal. Now, the S&P 500 can produce some great returns, but there is a lot of volatility. You can see that in the early 2000s, we had 3 bad years, then a good year. 2008, we lost 37%, but in 2019, it was up almost 35%. You can make a lot of money with the S&P 500 over time, but the problem with using an all-equity portfolio strategy in retirement in conjunction with the 4% spending rule is that you have to rely upon capital gains, and capital gains are not consistent. You can't expect capital gains every single year due to volatility. So that is why ultimately you see the principal amount going up and up and up, and by 2022, you're out of money. The all bond illustration is interesting. While we didn't run out of money, finishing with $581,000 after 25 years, we are seriously depleting our capital base. The reason why it worked is that the income off of the all bond portfolio was a lot greater than the distribution in the early years. You can see that the income column is a lot bigger in the early years than the distribution. But by 2009, we are now dipping into principal. And you can see that over time, the amount of principal coming out continues to grow, to accelerate. And that's because there's no growth in a bond portfolio. You're not getting any inflation protection. So the issue of longevity here is serious. If you live long enough with an all bond portfolio, a conservative strategy in retirement, you're going to run out of money if you're using the 4% rule in adjusting your distribution every year for inflation. This table is for the balance fund illustration. This is the portfolio strategy that most retirees will use during their retirement. It's just a question of what percentage in stocks and what percentage in bonds. Not all balanced strategies are the same, nor do they have the same returns. In this illustration, we're starting with $1 million in 2000. 25 years later, in November of 2024, we're at $825,000. Interesting that by combining stocks and bonds, we end up in a better place than if we were all stocks or all bonds. The issue of longevity, however, still remains. Now let's talk about the other ways the 4% spending rule fails. A large, unplanned distribution or a large portfolio loss. If you have a large unplanned distribution, for example, you have $2 million when you retire, a few years later, you take out $300,000. That would be a 15% reduction of your capital base. When you take that $300,000 out, what you should do is lower your distribution. But a lot of people won't do that. They need that distribution to pay their bills, to pay their real estate taxes and buy groceries and pay for vehicles, etc., etc. So when you take a large unplanned distribution off your portfolio in retirement, and it could be for something like buying a second home, upgrading your house, helping your kids with student loans, buying their home, whatever the case may be. If you do that and you don't lower your distribution, you're setting yourself up for failure. A large portfolio loss can also set you back in a big way. Just like a large unplanned distribution, if you have a significant loss to your capital, the best thing that you can do is to give your portfolio an opportunity to recover and tap the brakes on your distribution. But if you don't lower your distribution after you've had a substantial portfolio loss, this also will set you up for failure. If your financial advisor isn't well versed in retirement spending strategies or isn't talking to you about retirement spending strategies, please give my office a call. We would be happy to give you a second opinion on your retirement plan. If longevity runs in your family, or you think you might live to 95 or 100, you want to be focused when using the 4% spending rule in retirement. You want to meet with your financial advisor at least annually to discuss what kind of taxes you're paying, how your spending needs are changing, the asset allocation, and make any adjustments to the portfolio strategy and your distribution as needed. To be successful, you want to be on top of this throughout your retirement. It's an evolving picture. I hope this video was helpful. I hope it gets you thinking, helps you better analyze your investments, and overall improve your family's financial plan.